Hello, friends, and thank you again for visiting LSU Dynasties, the YouTube home of Legend Sports Universe, all-time dynasties, all the time, a collection of sports simulation dynasties bringing together the greatest athletes in history into one single universe. The Legend Sports Universe uses out-of-the-park baseball, franchise hockey manager, pro strategy football, and Title Bout Boxing, which is why you are here. This video will serve as a kind of detailed under-the-hood look at a project I've been working on here for a couple of months. The Title Bout to Fight Night conversion project is designed to bring fighters using the rating system of the classic Title Bout Boxing game, which is the best simulation of boxing ever done as far as I am concerned, and bringing it to the consoles through the best video representation of the sport that has been created, which is Fight Night Champion. Fight Night Champion is 11 years old at this point, and the boxing community has basically been ignored since then. There is a new game that is supposedly coming out. We'll see when we see it. The eSports Boxing Club is something that looks like it has a ton of promise, but their promotion and details have been spotty, to say the least. So judgment there is kind of reserved for now. So we can only deal with what we do have to use, which is Fight Night Champion. Again, I started this project a couple of months ago, developing formulas to try to transition Title Bout's rating system into Fight Night Champion. And then I kind of went and restarted and found some other things that I felt needed adjusting and restarted again. But we are now at a point where I have just released the first batch of fighters onto the Xbox Boxer Share. Again, if you've seen any of my prior videos where I posted a couple of fights, the Xbox Boxer Share is still up and running for Fight Night Champion. The PlayStation Boxer Share, however, was taken down ages ago. So unfortunately, I am only able to share these fighters via Xbox. I will eventually post the ratings so you can enter them yourself if you're using the PlayStation version. I just can't post them into the Boxer Share, which stinks, and I apologize, but is out of my control. So with that said, let me kind of get into how this project is being constructed. So the first issue at hand, of course, is deciding which fighters to use. Obviously, you can always, look up top lists. Everybody knows who the top guys are, particularly in the major weight classes. But kind of sorting it out, a hugely beneficial tool for me. It's kind of my first shout out of several I'll give to different people and places during the course of this, is Rummy's Corner, which you can find here on YouTube. And I strongly encourage any boxing fan to give him a follow, give him a subscribe. Rummy does an absolutely terrific job with boxing, particularly boxing history, but he does a lot of current stuff too. But Rummy did this thing, I guess it's about 5 years ago now, where he went through each of the weight divisions, and he went through Ring Magazine, which is obviously the Bible of boxing, and went through Ring Magazine's rankings, annual rankings of each division. And he allocated points, basically, so the top fighter, in a division in the year-end rankings got 10, second got 9, et cetera, went down that for each year, compiled those for each decade. So he put out a top of each decade list for each weight class. This was not meant, and Rummy makes this point frequently, it's not meant to say whoever's, top on the list is better than everybody below or stuff like that. It's more just kind of a measure of guys who were the most successful, who had the best careers in a weight class, were most influential in a weight class over time. It's kind of sustained. So you'll have somebody who bounces around in a lot of weight classes, not always be at the very top of the rankings. A guy like a Manny Pacquiao, for example, just because he didn't spend many years in a given weight class. So he kind of bounces around. So he's got decent ratings, points rather than ratings, I guess is a better way to describe it, in plenty of weight classes, but isn't at the top really of any. You'll see here, so this is just kind of the top 25 guys in the heavyweights as far as their point totals, and Ali Lewis at the top, But I mean, Vladimir Klitschko is third as far as points go. Nobody's going to say that Vladimir Klitschko is the third best heavyweight of all time, but he ruled the division for a sustained period over the course of the 2000s and the 2010s. So for that, he gets a lot of points. So it gives you a good list of the major players, even if they're not necessarily in the order of best fighter to worst fighter. But as for my creation, I'm largely going to go down this list with one kind of notable, or two notable kind of deviations from it. For one, because of the way that I'm doing things, I use CompuBox data for anybody who I have it from, because I feel like that's going to make things a lot more accurate. I do not have that data for older fighters. CompuBox has done a good job of going back and getting the top fights of top fighter versus top fighter of legendary guys going back into the 70s. They'll have some data on some Ali fights, old Foreman fights, Carlos Monzon, guys like that, Roberto Duran. But there's not as much data there. So I'm going to kind of do guys based on how much the legendary guys who I can at least get some CompuBox data for, I'll do. But your older guys like Joe Louis and stuff like that are going to wait a little bit, because I feel like I'm going to be able to get my formulas and my ratings mechanism better with the more guys I have more data for first. So those guys are all going to get done, but the older fighters, the really way back guys, are going to kind of get pushed down the list a little bit for now. The other caveat of that is also just me doing, if there's a fighter who I really liked personally, who may be a little bit further down the list, I may do him a little bit on the earlier side. You'll see with the heavyweights, like I always liked Tim Witherspoon. So Tim Witherspoon's been done already. You go into like the junior middleweights, Mike McCallum, whose point total actually isn't as high as I expected it to be, because McCallum's an all-time great. But his point total by this measure has him a little bit further down the list, so he kind of would have waited if I was doing things in order. But McCallum is one of my favorite fighters ever, so I've done Mike McCallum. Guys like that, just kind of a personal preference thing. We'll kind of get them bumped a little bit up the list. So with that established, let's start talking about creating the fighters. I'm not going to talk about appearances, because honestly, I take a lot of models that other guys have created as far as the physical look of fighters. I'm not great at that. Other guys are much better at it than I am. I will obviously end up doing it for a lot of guys, but a lot of people are better at it than I am, and you don't need me to walk through that. So we're going to skip all that, and we're just going to talk about how we are rating the fighters to perform. I say attributes here. In Fight Night Champion, they actually refer to them as AI tendencies, basically how a fighter is going to perform. It's kind of their fighter's style and how they fight. So let's look into how we're going to create that. So here you're going to see a screenshot of the Title Bout cards, and what the cards look like there. And you'll see some of the attributes here. So we're kind of going to go down the line a little bit. The CF is a control factor. That's actually the huge omission from Fight Night. It's basically for ring generalship. And there's no real measure for that in Fight Night. It remains to be seen if I'm not going to get into this game too much here, but the hopefully forthcoming eSports Boxing Club is going to have something like that in it. I'm not sure whether that's going to be the case. Who knows by the time that is released, end of this year, sometime next year, whatever. That's all kind of up in the air. So I don't know if that's going to be in there. So as far as the control factor goes, I kind of had to work that in different ways throughout this, because there's no real setting for it. So I'll get into control factors implementation a bit later as we go on. But you'll see, AGG, aggressiveness, killer instinct, endurance, how many fouls a fighter, will commit, defense, their knockdown ratings. They kind of have two knockdown ratings. One is a primary knockdown, and another is kind of how they recover from the initial knockdown or how susceptible they are to a follow-up knockdown. Rating for getting knocked out, their susceptibility to cuts. You'll see strategies there: fighting inside, fighting outside, covering up, knockout. As far as actions go, you'll see punches landed, how often they land, what their hitting power is, how many punches missed. If you've played the game, those numbers, as far as basically they're from fast action. When you played the board game, they were flip cards. The boxing action card logo you see there in the middle. So kind of numbers in that range would say whether a guy landed his punch, missed his punch, whether he decided to go in for a clinch, or whether he was moving around the ring. The hitting value, there is the different types of punches and whether they were more powerful shots, which are the 3-point punches, or a standard punch is the 2-point punches. So those are the things that we're kind of working off of to help create the Fight Night ratings. So now let's go and look at the Fight Night attributes, and we'll kind of talk about how things kind of come into play here. So here you'll see the tendencies as far as Fight Night Champion goes. So body snatcher, headhunter, basically how much a guy works the head as opposed to working the body. Whether counterpuncher or being aggressive, is very tied into punch volume, as is the next one: single punches or combinations, fast punches or hard punches. The game has there's a button when you play it where you can kind of try to put extra power into a punch, which takes a little extra stamina but does a little bit more damage. So it's basically power punching, kind of putting that extra aggressiveness into your punch. Inside fighter versus an outside fighter, how often a fighter clinches, blocks, punches, moves, head is basically how a fighter defends. Is a fighter more apt to defend themselves by blocking the punches, or are they more about kind of head movement, ducking, dodging, weaving? How much they taunt, I don't really deal in that. Plotter and mover is how they actually move around the ring. Are they a stalker of a fighter, or are they kind of moving around perpetually? Whether they fight clean, whether they fight dirty, how many fouls they commit, etc. And then the different punch frequencies: left hook, right hook. It also has jab, straight, left uppercut, right uppercut. Obviously also ties into the punch volume. So how are we bringing all of these things together? Let's go down the line here. As far as the fighter style, Fight Night Champion has 7 main styles. A fighter can be a boxer puncher, an inside fighter, an outside fighter, a counter puncher, a conventional fighter, an unconventional fighter, or a brawler. Title bout styles only are boxer, puncher, or the ability to fight both. However, Title Bout has a bunch of fighter strategies, and that includes the ability to fight inside or outside, as you mentioned, covering up and going for the knockout. So basically, I have made it so that different combinations of those styles and the strategy frequencies determine what style will be chosen for a fighter in Fight Night Champion. So boxer puncher is the most common, but you'll have your classic inside fighter like a Joe Frazier, have your classic kind of outside fighters. Unconventional is kind of I find to be the big one. Those are your really defensive, slick, dodgy fighters, Pernell Whitakers, Nicolino Loesch, if you're going back a bit. Guys like that. Brawlers, I don't use the brawler rating very much. A brawler rating really kind of goes to somebody who doesn't have much skill, because I feel like the brawlers in simulation tests that I did, just brawlers always do badly. So I felt like giving a good fighter a brawler rating was probably going to end up hurting him. So that rating does not get used very frequently. Counterpuncher versus aggressiveness. The base number for that rating is punches per round based on the CompuBox data. Title Bout's aggressiveness rating is factored in as well, but it's primarily about the punches per round as the start. Again, all of these are basically to form a base rating, and then once I test it against a stock fighter that I created, basically I test everybody against that same stock fighter, who is a very solid across the board fighter, but not exceptional. No very clear strength, no very clear weakness. Just a good, solid, balanced boxer puncher, as that's the most common style. I test everybody against that, for the purposes of that way. If I'm making a mistake in my formulas and I tend to favor something, I rate something too high or too low or whatever, it'll be very easy for me to just kind of go through and say, hey, this is a miscalculation. I can fix this for everybody in one shot. So the single punches versus combinations is a weighted figure based on that aggressiveness rating, plus the jab percentage based on CompuBox data also. A very, more combinations are going to be less jabs thrown. So that, that single punch and combination rating and the counterpuncher aggressiveness rating really kind of work hand in hand in establishing how busy a fighter is. Fast punches, hard punches, weighted based on Title Bout's hitting power rating and the killer instinct rating. Killer instinct, this was a good logical place to drop this. Fight Night Champion doesn't have anything for killer instinct or a finisher rating or anything like that. So I needed a place to drop that rating because it's really important in Title Bout. And this was a good place to drop that. A fighter will ramp up the number of hard punches, the extra power, as I mentioned before, that they're trying to put in the punches when they're trying to finish a guy. So that seemed like a logical place to drop that. Inside versus outside fighting, obviously based on Title Bouts, inside versus outside strategy usage. Clinching, based on the number of clinch numbers on the Title Bout fighter's card. Blocking punches versus head movement. That kind of factors Title Bouts inside and outside strategies, as well as a fighter's defensive rating, as well as the next rating, which is plotter versus mover, which is basically how a guy, again, actually moves around the ring. That is based on the movement number in Title Bout. That, as you saw on those cards, after clinching, there's ring movement. So it's based on that, as well as the defensive rating. Generally speaking, a good defensive fighter moves around more. That's obviously not perfect, but that's generally the way it goes. It also factors in the CompuBox data for an opponent's punches landed, and for fouls, that is obviously based on Title Bout's fouls rating. That's pretty self-explanatory. Moving on to punch frequency. This one is a little bit tricky, only because Fight Night Champion does not do a great job with jab percentages if you strictly rely on the punch frequency sliders to get the higher punch counts. So in trying to get the right number of punches thrown per round, I focused a lot more on the aggressiveness rating and the single punch combinations rating. So you'll see in guys who I create will have a lot of the jab punch frequency bar is high and the other punch bars are very low. Don't be thrown by that when you see them actually fight. The punch numbers are realistic for all the different punch types, but that is just basically a mechanism to get the jab totals right. The default fighters in the game just do not throw the proper number of jabs, I found. So this was kind of a way around that. And again, I mean, you can kind of test that out for yourself if you as you create guys in the game, if you want to. I just find that to be the best mechanism, particularly for some reason with southpaws. Getting a high punch output, high jab southpaw right in this game proved very, very difficult. It's almost like there's a different mechanism in place for southpaws than for orthodox fighters. Another item of note there, in a perfect example of those little things that EA missed. When you are doing the punch frequencies for a southpaw, the jab is the straight frequency, and the straight is the jab frequency. When you do the skills, which we'll get to in a minute, for each punch, those are correct. But in allocating the punch frequency, it's actually reversed for a lefty when you set up the tendencies. Just kind of be aware of that. But as for determining the punch breakdown, if you look at the numbers for those punches landed on the title bout cards, the different punch types and 3-punch versus 2-punch, basically you eliminate the jab from that, take the jabs out of the equation. The ratio of the other punches to each other is how the punch frequency sliders in Fight Night Champion are created for each fighter. So, because CompuBox data just breaks it down into jabs and power punches. So, I don't have anything more specific as to number of crosses, number of, combinations, number of straights, uppercuts, etc. So that's where the title bout data for this really kind of comes into establishing how a fighter's punch output is broken down. Okay, so now let's take a look at skills. We've gotten a fighter to behave the way a fighter is supposed to behave. Now let's get them to perform the way they're supposed to perform. Fight Night's skills range goes from 1 to 20, and it covers all the different types of punches, both to the head and to the body, plus combination punching. And then defensively, punch blocking and head movement. And then chin, obviously, ability to take a punch, and heart, which is a really dumb term that they use for basically the ability to sustain body shots. I don't know why they decided to call it that, but that's what they call it. So the punch type skills themselves have a huge impact on the number of punches landed. So those factor in the overall punches landed percentage based on CompuBox data, as well as Title Bout's 2-point, 3-point breakdown in their ratings, and the Title Bout's punches landed rating as well. The block and head movement skills factor, those take into account the opponent's punches landed via CompuBox and Title Bout's defensive rating, and those are weighted to give a fighter a total number of defense points, basically. And then those defense points are allocated based on the block/head movement rating mentioned back when we were talking about the AI tendencies. The chin rating is weighed based on Title Bout's knockdown and knockout ratings. And that heart rating is weighed in the same fashion as the chin rating, but with a lot more leniency, because Fight Night by default has way too many knockdowns from body shots, particularly as a fighter gets tired. So as such, to kind of compensate for that, most fighters that will be created as part of this project are going to have a heart rating of a 19 or 20, unless they're really somebody who hits the deck frequently. But that kind of is designed to mitigate that, that little hang up in Fight Night. So lastly, let's move over to the athleticism. Again, it's kind of a weird term, I guess, that they're using for this stuff. I probably would call it something different. But these are basically the most impactful ratings in Fight Night, and will have the greatest singular impact with a slight tweak on how a fighter performs. The plan is, once I run all of these guys through against each other, as opposed to the test dummy that I use to create the base for each of them. Once I have them fight each other, and then I'm kind of gauging their accuracy there, fighting the other 10 guys who I create in their class in a given batch. Those tweaks will then come as far as who's beating who and stuff like that. So I can make the little nuance adjustments and all the stuff I've mentioned already. The really significant adjustments if a fighter is severely over or underperforming are going to come here from the athleticism. Um, you know, I created, if the if the wrong guys are winning, basically, too much, those are going to be big scale adjustments, and that's largely going to come from this stuff. So let's kind of go down the list. Strength should be self-explanatory, but it isn't. Fight Night's worst trait, I think, um, is that it gives a singular rating multiple purposes. The strength rating is not just for punching power like you would expect. It is also used for a fighter's ability to block punches. This kind of creates a hang up where a poor defensive fighter who hits really hard, where do you lean? Um, if you give too high a strength rating, you're going to boost his defense too much. If you give too low a strength rating, you're going to take his one strength that's probably his best weapon, and you're going to kind of minimize it on him. I opted to largely base this off of Title Bout's hitting power rating for now, and I will adjust it as needed, again, once the fighters are tested more thoroughly. But I really didn't want to shortchange a fighter's punching power. So I was willing to kind of give them a little bit of a defensive bonus rather than sacrifice the power at this point. The speed rating, similarly to strength, the same speed rating factors in hand speed and foot speed, which is absolutely ridiculous and requires me, again, to try to strike a bit of a balance. I went largely with a combination of the punches landed percentage and the opponent's punches landed percentage, as well as the movement rating and Title Bout's defensive rating. The premise being that a high land percentage, good defensive fighter is most likely going to be someone who's quick with their hands and their feet as well. Again, that is not perfect by any stretch, but given how Fight Night chose to handle this rating, I felt like it was the best balance. Endurance and conditioning, both of those are based off of Title Bout's endurance rating, though the conditioning factors in the knockdown recovery rating as well. The way Fight Night words it, the endurance rating is basically in anaerobic resistance, dictates the rate that your current stamina level will burn off. Conditioning is aerobic resistance, dictating the rate that your maximum stamina level will burn off, which is, actually a fairly intelligent way of doing it. So I actually think that they get that one right. Toughness factors in Title Bout's knockdown and knockout resistance ratings. That rating, tweaking that rating does a lot. It's kind of, if guys are getting knocked down a lot, that's really the rating where you want to go and adjust things. It's also a big thing is, it's how much health a punch will take off. It also gets fighters stunned. So like if you've played Title Bout and say, oh, that punch really has him looking dazed and all that kind of stuff, that's kind of where that situation comes in. Reflexes, as with strength and speed, this rating also has a dual purpose, foolishly. It impacts both how quick a fighter dodges or gets their guard up and how quickly they fire a counterpunch. So those should be separate ratings. But again, we have to go and strike a balance. I largely went with the defensive ratings dictating this, like I did with speed, thinking I can use the punch ability ratings, in the skills to kind of balance out the offensive impact of me choosing to focus on defense here. All right, so up next, let's talk about punch data and targets. I've referred to CompuBox and trying to set these targets based on data that's available for guys as kind of base guidelines for around where we want them in as far as behaving the way they should behave in 4 key areas: punches thrown per round, the percentage of those punches that are jabs, the punches landed percentage, the opponent's punches landed percentage. CompuBox has a pretty decent. It's listed as being a beta version of their a website, but they've got a pretty good collection, particularly for recent stuff. Of you'll see here that we've got Bo Holyfield. I don't remember which Bo Holyfield fight this is actually, but so you'll see they've got the total punches landed and thrown broken down by round, jabs landed, power punches, and then the final report down at the bottom, which is what we go by. So now, here's a chart. I use Mike Tyson here. So you'll see 10 fights, including Tyson's first first major title shot against Trevor Berbick. And then the next 10 fights. And that I'm kind of using that as a rough gauge of what a fighter's quote-unquote prime was. Prime is different for every fighter, but I think going with the 10 after their first title shot in the weight class, if that exists, if they've even fought 10 times in the weight class after a title shot. So not everybody has. But that kind of gives us a guideline. So now what we come out with is a target for Tyson based on all of those. 36 punches per round. I actually haven't updated the way I set this sheet up, and I need to. When I first started this project, I had done it as 5 categories: jabs per round, power shots per round. But I realized that was kind of redundant. And I was more concerned with the percentage of punches that were jabs being correct. So I basically wiped out the doubling up basically of jabs per round, power per round, and just made it jab percentage. And then you see the punches landed percentage at 46, opponent's land percentage at 31. Now, we talked about the 20% difference and how on the surface that might seem like a lot, but look at the variation in these numbers. The punches landed percentage, Tyson's pretty consistently in the 40s there. So 46 works well. But if you look at the opponent's punches landed, you've got a range there. You've got a couple in the 40s. Bone Crusher Smith, who just basically clinched all fight, is down at 19. Spinks was 20 in that, lightning fast 91 seconds. Frank Bruno landed 21. So you've got guys from 20s, guys in the 40s. And again, that's in the same period for Tyson. So you're going to have a lot of fluctuations there. So that's kind of why I went with the 20% thing. Even if you dropped out, I thought about clipping the top number and the bottom number. So even if you clipped out, say, the 42.9 that Holmes landed against him and the Bone Crusher Smith 18.6, you've still got a variation there going from the 20% that Spinks landed and the 21 that Bruno landed up to 41.6 from Pinkwin Thomas. So it's still a huge gap. That's a well more than 20% difference, actually. So that's kind of why stuff like that is fairly consistent among fighters. You'll see variations like that. And that's kind of why I settled in on the 20% figure in establishing the targets that we want guys to reach. So how do those targets translate into the fight grade? Here is data from a bout I ran a little bit ago. Costa Tszyu and Meldrick Taylor. Again, a pretty good kind of mix of styles there. So, based on the CompuBox data that we have for these guys, we have more for Tszyu than we do for Taylor, but we still have a bit. Tszyu averaged 58 punches per round. 40% of those were jabs. Landed 37%. Opponents landed 29% on average. Meldrick Taylor averaged 84 punches per round. 39% of those were jabs. Landed 43% on average. Opponents landed 35% on average, which was admittedly surprising to me to a degree because you think of Taylor as being a pretty solid defensive fighter. But the fact is, Meldrick Taylor got hit a lot, and that's why the Chavez fight went down the way it did. We think of Meldrick Taylor as being so fast and quick, and he moved a lot, and he had all this skill, but he really wanted to be a Philly fighter. And so he would stand in there and trade even when it wasn't in his best interests. So the opponent's land percentage of 35% for Taylor was surprising, but you are what the numbers say you are, at least to a degree. All right, so that's their data from CompuBox. So the bout targets, the punches thrown per round and the jabs, I kind of leave as is. The land percentages are basically the average of a fighter's land percentage and what the opponent generally allows. Again, that's imperfect, but it's good. It's a good guideline to use. So you got on average here, these guys should both be landing, and their opponents should be landing 36. And again, we want to be within 20% of those figures. The results. The fight actually ended up being a draw. I actually wish I had recorded it because it was a really entertaining bout to watch. Costazu throws 59 punches in a round compared with the 58 that was the target. He's off by 1.7%. We will absolutely take that. That is as good as we're going to get it. Jabs 34% versus the 40 that was the target. So he's 15% off there, within the acceptable range of 20%. So we're good there. Punches landed percentage 27 compared to the 36 that we were expecting. So that's a little bit low. That's 25% off. So he's a little bit outside the range that we would have liked. Opponent's punches landed. Taylor lands 35%. The target was 36. So that's only 2.8% off. So again, if we take these things, as I mentioned earlier, as 4 grades, and we're looking for an average breaking 80. Excuse me. The punches thrown per round grade basically works out to a 98. The opponent's landed grade basically works out to a 97. That's exceptional. I couldn't really have asked for much better than that. The jab percentage grade works out to an 85. The land percentage for Zoo works out as a 75. The overall grade there ends up being just shy of 88.9. Round that to an 89. That is a really, really good grade. Really, really solid. Before we've really made any tweaks, like I've said, are going to come down the line. That's just a base version 1 grade. So we're happy with that. Meldrick Taylor throws 69 punches per round compared with 84. We're off 17.9 there. Jab percentage, you can see the chart. You don't need me to read the whole thing to you. Jab percentage is off 12.8%. Punches landed, as we said, off 2.8%. Opponent's punches landed off 25%. So that grade works out to an 85. Okay, so both of these guys well within the range, well acceptable. I'll see again. We go through them when they each fight the other, the other 10 fighters who will be in their class for that group's first release. We'll see how everything shakes out there, but we will make adjustments accordingly. But that is a really, really good result from both of them. So we're happy with that. But that's kind of how the calculation is going to go for a fighter's grade for each fight. And then obviously they'll have the 10 fight average. And that will kind of determine what adjustments need to be made for the second versions of these fighters. But that's the nuts and bolts of how the targets and the results turn into a grade for this project. So a few quick things here to wrap up about the project and what's coming and what's up now and all that kind of stuff. First thing, and I said this earlier, remember that it's your game. The first rule of any roster creation, I've done roster creation for 25 plus years. I've done stuff for High Heat, Out of the Park Baseball, MVP Baseball. I've done stuff for Pro Strategy Football. I've created fighters for Title Bout. I've done this for a long time. The first rule of using any roster creation or mod in your game is that it's your game. If you disagree with a rating, change it so you are happy with it. Like I mentioned earlier, I've got a good base in place here. I've thought it out. I've tested it well. I'm confident that I'm at least in the ballpark on all these fighters. But at the end of the day, once you download it, you own it. And the only thing that matters is that you're happy with it. So trust yourself, trust your knowledge of a fighter, of an athlete. If you use a different mod, whatever, trust your knowledge and use things accordingly. A couple things I may have touched on before. I don't remember actually at this point whether I did or not. The older fighters, Joe Louis, Willie Pep, Harry Greb, are those guys coming? Yes, they are coming, but I want to kind of try to fine tune my methodology with guys who I have the most data on as far as like those CompuBox stats. And the reasoning is that once I can kind of tighten up the correlation between the title bout ratings conversion and the punch statistics, then I'll be able to really make the ratings for fighters just off of the title bout ratings when I have to more accurate. So if I can kind of tie in the correlations there for the title bout ratings and what gets us to the result that we want, doing that for Joe Louis and Lily Pep and those guys, will become much easier. As for how many guys I plan on creating, I showed you a bit of a fighter list just from the heavyweights before, but that list goes down to like 75 or more guys in a weight class. I mean, I've got a list that goes to about 100 guys per weight class. Am I going to get to create all those guys? Does it make sense to create all those guys? Probably not. The guys at the bottom of that list. But I'm going to do a good number of fighters. I've got, as far as a list of guys I plan on doing, I'm probably upwards of 300 to 400 fighters that I'm going to hope to get done. Honestly, how many I create for Fight Night is really going to depend on that eSports Boxing Club game, when it is released, what its status is. If that game comes out and it reaches its potential, then I will probably just go and start transferring this project over to that. Like I said, Fight Night Champion is great for what it was, but it does have a few weaknesses, and it is 11 years old. Visually, I mean, esports boxing, will be much better. And I'm encouraged, as I mentioned, by the inside fighting of that game, which is a glaring weakness in Fight Night. It will see. But as long as Fight Night is kind of the only game in town, I will continue to do this as much as I can for as long as I can, as much as time goes, as much as time allows. As far as using these fighters, do you have to just use the guys I create with the guys I create? You don't have to. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't work with other guys. They may not be quite as accurate results if that's what you're looking for. But I don't think they're going to be so dramatically off from anything that it's gonna, that's gonna really disrupt anything. So I think you can kind of use them. You're not going to break anything by using guys who I've created with fighters, with the stock fighters in the game, or with fighters who anybody else may have made along the line. I do use this for simulation, watching simulations, but I have used them fighting against each other, and it works well. So you can kind of use these in any form that you want, obviously with the caveat that a fighter who you're controlling is only going to perform accurately if you're fighting the way that fighter would fight. If you take an outside fighter and decide you want him to be a wild, brawler inside, well, then that's fine. You can do that, but the accuracy will be different. And the big one, I guess, is, did I adjust the stock fighters who came with Fight Night? I have done the ratings for all those guys. The problem is that I can't share those guys. There are people who have created fighter models for those guys. Your Mike Tysons, your Muhammad Ali's, Lennox Lewis's, Marvin Hagler's, Carlos Monzon's, etc. Some of them are just bad that you just can't recreate the likeness. The fighter creation module, particularly as far as faces, is rather limited in Fight Night, so you can get as close as you can get to a point, but the models that they created of these guys as the stock guys look really good. So basically, if I can find a model that I think is an acceptable one, I will put my ratings onto that model and upload it. Otherwise, I will simply post the fighter ratings for the stock guys who I don't find an acceptable model for, and then you can go ahead and add those models, add those stats and ratings to those models in your game yourself. So, which fighters are available right now? How do I get these guys? The Boxer Share for Xbox, you can search for my gamer tag on there. At this point, it's you can see there, IA Real PFK5, which is actually an account that I set up for my son way back when. I'm going to try to set up a different account for myself, and I'll ultimately port things over there. But for now, that's where you find them. And this is the release from April 12th. This is 25 fighters. Heavyweights, you got Riddick Bowe, George Foreman, who did come with the game, but there was a good guy created, a guy who did a good model of Foreman, so Foreman's already up there. Larry Holmes, Tim Witherspoon, Tyson Fury. The middleweight crop consists of Marvin Hagler, Carlos Monzon, Gennady Golovkin, Michael Nunn, who's a personal favorite, Bernard Hopkins, William Joppy, Emil Griffith, and Felix Sturm. At welterweight, Felix Trinidad, Paul Williams, Vernon Forrest, Marlon Starling, another favorite from the 80s, Errol Spence, Ike Quartey, Terrence Crawford, and Antonio Margarito. And at junior welterweight, Meldrick Taylor, Wilfred Benitez, Nicolino Losh, and Kostizu. There will be another, I'm hoping for 25 fighters due out in the next few days. I'm adding a couple of guys to get these classes basically up to 11 each. For my own testing purposes, but once I get that done, you guys will have those fighters as well, and of course in other weight classes too. So figure another 25 guys or so will be out within the next week. In closing, just a few acknowledgments and thanks, because I wouldn't be able to do this project without these things. Starting with Title Bout. Like I said, I grew up playing this game in the 80s. The first fight I actually remember doing was the Mike Tyson Michael Spinks fight. Shortly before that fight actually went down, and I remember Tyson knocked him out, but it wasn't in 91 seconds. But that game really fostered my love of the sport, because I remember watching Wide World of Sports and all these kind of things back when all these fights were on regular TV on the weekends, and so that kind of I got to see all these guys and then could go and play fights with them and stuff like that, and that was really cool. I'd only been able to do that with like baseball before that, so Title Bout, certainly none of this happens without that. Also, obviously, I have to give a shout to the creators of Fight Night Champion 2, which, like I said, despite a few flaws, limitations, glitches, whatever, it still is a really good, really solid game. And I wouldn't be able to do this project without it. Big shout out to to this group on Facebook, which is run by Jim Trunzo, who's creator of Title Bout. And I could not be more appreciative of the fact that Jim lets me post my stuff about this project, knowing that the final result is really not playing his game. Jim has been very supportive of stuff that I've posted there about this project, and I could not be more appreciative for his generosity there. Rummy's Corner, which I mentioned before, great stuff as far as helping me refine the list of fighters that I want to use for this project in a very kind of neat and tidy format. Ring Magazine, which is the Bible of boxing, which I read religiously for years, and I'm still going back to now to kind of look at ratings and stuff like that and flesh out a couple of things since Rummy's project stopped in 2017. The guys on Boxing Forum 24, which is my favorite of the boxing message boards that I'm on. Just a really knowledgeable group of guys. So I kind of, as I read about different fighters and look up people talking about different fighters, I learn a lot from them. And CompuBox for the data. Like I said, their website is beta, but like they have a contact thing on there, and I've emailed them asking about a couple of things, a couple of details, and whatever like that, and they always get back to me quickly. So I've been, I could not do anything that I'm doing with this project without any of these guys or groups or whatever. So I just wanted to make sure I gave a shout out there. And with that, this comes to an end. Like I said, I just kind of wanted to give people a deep dive into the project and exactly why I'm doing things the way I am, exactly my methodology, how I'm kind of creating things. So hopefully this was fun for you and an enjoyable listen. And I love talking shop, so this stuff is always good for me too. But thank you all for your support. If you have not subscribed yet, please do. And you can kind of keep up on everything going on here in the Legend Sports universe. Until next time, thank you, be good to each other, and we'll talk soon.